there's so many variables at play in determining anything that we are confined and limited to what we can perceive the variables to be.
Yeah.
And we cannot make a judgment about any one person's decision outside of our ability to perceive the factors that influence that decision.
So I have a theory about this, by the way. Going back to the whole notion of we have certain autonomous processes that run in our body, sort of the cells just doing their thing, and we're not having to think about them consciously, right? And then we have certain things that happen consciously. And so my philosophy, or my theory here, is that decisions are actually happening at, like we're using various parts of our brain to make these decisions, right? And what I think is happening is that we can only devote different parts of our brain to different, like we have very limited when it comes to our conscious brain power. Right. It can only be directed at a small set of things at once, and different theories about that. But let's just say that it is necessarily more limited than our overall brain capacity to think. Right. Okay. So I think that in some ways, free will, or just the will itself, is necessarily focusing that brain power on whatever processes or actions or thoughts are going to be the most beneficial for our evolution. It's like a survival type of mechanism. And so by focusing on those set of, call them decisions, if you will, because all these are essentially being decided by the brain overall. Right. But by focusing on that subset of them has, evolutionarily wise or biologically speaking, has been what is sort of what has led to our ability to build up better survival, better fitness over time. And
Absolutely.
so as a survival mechanism, it's sort of been built into our biology just as a result of focusing that part of our brain that can do things like rational thinking and reason and logic and those sorts of things on a very small subset of our reality and our perception. And so by focusing on just those things, it has led to outcomes that have benefited us over time. Does that make sense?
Right, almost like does the notion of sacrificing a little bit of pain in the now for the benefit of the future, is that kind of not synonymous but commensurate with what you're saying?
That's a part of what I'm saying, yeah. So that the ability to think in those ways has led to our improved fitness for survival over time. But if we were to be using that same brain power to be questioning all the decisions our body was making about these cells should be doing this thing, basically we would end up trying to micromanage ourselves, and we would essentially make no progress. So we have to focus on just those decisions, just those actions of the brain that are going to lead to the best chance or just best improvements in our fitness to survive over time, right? Right. So I think that by having that focus, it's sort of because that focus happens to be where our own conscious thought process happens, we have this oversimplification. Again, it's like an abstraction, except in this case it's a much more severe abstraction. And in some ways it's kind of like a I don't want to use the wrong term here, but it's a useful fiction in some ways.
A useful fiction, yeah.
Yeah.
I call it a useful illusion, but yeah, same thing.
Calling it an illusion, fiction, whatever you want to call it. But it's not an illusion in that there's no ability to affect these with our mental processes, because I think that's where the decisions get made. The illusion is the fact that all of the decision making is happening only in this one part of our brain. But the reason we've evolved that is to sort of manage the problem that is life, that is way too big to fit in that one space, right?
Well, think it's like decentralized command, right? In the event that, say, maybe there's something wrong with, say, an organ in your body, you have these pain sensors that can detect that pain. You're like, oh, something's wrong with my liver, or something is wrong with my spleen, or something like that. And so the conscious mind can become aware of that and be like, okay, that's a problem. I need to figure out what that is. What do I do? Well, in our society, you go to a doctor, right? But
but that, I think those types of sensations are only elevated for a small portion. Pain is definitely one of the sensations that gets elevated from the unconscious or subconscious mind to the conscious, because it's a signal to us that something's going wrong. Whereas we don't necessarily perceive everything in our bodies that's going right all the time, or that would just be too much sensation, right?
Right, exactly. And there'd be no filter in perception. I
Yeah.
think I mentioned in a previous episode how people who are like highly autistic, they actually have problems with that filtering and
Right,
that
and
processing.
that's a good analogy. I think free will is in some ways, it's a filter on our experiences down to only those which we include in our conscious mind. And that helps us bias us in a way that moves us in a good direction. It sort of gives us that will in a sense.
Right.